All right, perfect. Everyone, welcome to Training Thursday and the new format. It's my pleasure today to, for our first run at this, Glenn Schmelzle. How you doing, Glenn?
I'm doing fine, thanks. Brock, how about you?
Doing really well. Hopefully everyone can hear us and see us. Worst case, Glenn, we're just having a conversation, just the two of us.
That works for me.
Yeah, exactly. So, how are things over there? How's your week been so far? How's the start to the new year?
The new year has been good in that people are doing their very best to follow the normal cadence of how you start a year. And that's saying a lot for people, right? Because we don't have normal conditions. And so I applaud a lot of people for just getting on with it and trying to follow as much as they can normally do,
Yeah.
even though it's not normal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's every day things are changing, right? I know for me, like the most interesting part really has been the kids at home for school, right? Um,
Yep.
and not being able to not being able to leave the house, but less activity, less going on, and I find it really hits at the end of the night where they're just so like overtired, and you're feeling the same thing.
Yeah, the thing that gets me, and I know that marketers are somewhat nerdy around words and the meaning of things. I find it so funny that the term that people have gone for, because I guess most people had been in offices, is work from home. And for me, I'm saying the same thing if I say you live where you work. But you can tell the difference there.
Yeah,
And it's
for
not
sure.
so much fun to live where you work.
It's a really good point. Well, just to, maybe just to give everybody on the team a little bit of an introduction. So, Glenn and trying to think, I think the first time I've ever met you was years ago. I'm thinking maybe 2013, and we met and
Yeah.
had coffee and had a discussion. And
Yep.
obviously, you were more of a vet in the industry than I was. I was the newbie coming in, but very very welcoming, and I think we had some really great chats, and that kind of blossomed. I think we
Yep.
you invited me to an event over at the old Mexicala Rosas, and that was kind of like I think it was a
That's
holiday
right.
Facebook versus
It
Google.
was. Yeah. Had you on a panel for that and went through that, and then we kind of met at other events that have to do with digital marketing analytics in town.
Yeah.
And in the fall of last year, you were kind enough to come on the podcast that I do
Yeah.
and talk about new things on search engine results pages.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this next talk that we're about to have, because I'm not only repaying a favor, but I'm more than happy to just keep this whole discussion going.
Yeah.
We all live in for me, I really can't think of a better field that we've chosen to be in, and I never get tired of talking about it.
I know, right? There's always something to talk about.
Yeah.
Excellent. So, I mean, just to kind of give an introduction of yourself, and maybe kind of a little bit about your work education or work education, your work history, and kind of how you got to this point,
Sure.
running an agency. Maybe just give us a bit of background there.
Uh, yeah, that's. I'll try and do it quickly. I'm fortunate in that I have been able to do the tour, if we can think of it that way. I've been an employee working at a very large company, and that's kind of where I started my career. And I've also been able to work in small businesses and even a startup type environment. And yeah, for the last 7 years, I've been running a small agency. So from that standpoint, I guess I've worn every hat that you can do in that, and my time through there has been the common ribbons that thread all the way through that are being able to market stuff, being able to sell stuff, being able to understand what's happening. So there's your analytics, and being able to manage. So I'm fortunate to have kind of acquired all those things. I've really been lucky to get a chance. And I encourage people to think of what they're picking up as they go, regardless of which hat you're wearing at the moment, because you're either picking up something firsthand in what's being asked of you, or you are able to hang around other people and watch what they're doing with whatever hat they have on, and you're by osmosis getting what they know, or maybe getting an example of what not to do by what they're doing. So yeah, I'm really fortunate in that I have, at least on that whole what do you do question, right? I've been able to at each point have a different piece. So that's the how. That doesn't necessarily explain the why. So maybe we can talk about that next with like why marketing, Glenn.
Yeah, I mean that is a good question. Why marketing?
So I didn't start in marketing.
Okay.
So I'll roll back to school. So step 4, work, and I have to give you a date, which I shudder to do because now I'm probably going to be naming years that, you know, some of the people listening to this were in grade school or maybe even not here. But I'm okay with that. I was fortunate in the early 90s. I had gone through school. I did a bachelor's degree. I did it in, of all things, classical civilization. So I got to study all really old stuff. And and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I went through, but you can't go get a job with knowing Greek and Roman history. So I went and got into business school. And I went to business school, and it was actually not that far from here, from Ottawa. So I went to upstate New York, and I got to a school there that was specializing in Canada-US trade. And that was just around the time that was getting going with Canada and the US, and then Mexico. So that was NAFTA, now USMCA. So that was all very interesting and very data intensive, right? You're dealing with economics, you're dealing with different players in an ecosystem, lots of companies involved in the logistics and supply chain. So I tumbled out of that, found a company that was interesting to me because they were using that, and they, as well as some of the nerds that had been back at business school, introduced me to this thing called the internet. And it started really early. Like, there was no graphical interface. It was command line. I remember there being places where you could look up a database that was, let's say, at another university. And when it came to working in this logistics company, we were able to go to StatsCan and get some information out of their databases. It was fascinating to me. And as I go back, I realized that I was probably one of the first 5 million people that was on the internet, which boggles my mind. But it was at that point, you know, it's like how people describe Facebook, right? So in the early days, brief history, it was the U.S. Defense Department and research universities and some other bodies that had to do things where they were managing international business. Those were kind of the only parties that needed the internet. So, for example, on the business side, I worked at a company that was in charge of looking at shipments coming in by air, shipments coming in on a boat to a port, shipments coming in intermodal on rail. So this kind of information, most information in those days, folks, came through a fax machine. So it was really cool to be able to have it stay digital from the originating computer source to the, receiver's computer. And so they just, they heard that I knew something about this internet, so they plopped me in a chair and said, there's this information here, can you kind of sift it and sort it and find it? So I found that great, and I really just geeked out on all the database work that we could do. And yes, I was doing a fair bit of it in spreadsheets, but that love of data and that understanding that there's an answer to whatever question you want somewhere in data. So go find it. And I got that really strongly there. And I also fell in love with the fact that that company decided that that data was important enough that they wanted to share with their clients in a similar way to how banks made the move around the same time to not asking you to go into the branch, but they gave you online banking, which of course, banking on your phone with an app is a natural extension. So just this whole information wants to be free philosophy and, you know, let the data spread where it should go. That was something that I just fell in love with, and I found myself after that getting into software companies. So I realized that telling people about this really excited me, and that was marketing's job. So, you know, I would take all of these lovely databases that had maybe a little skin of a UI on them, and I would go and start helping the sales teams find companies and get them jazzed about how they could get this information. And that was on-premise software at the time, moved to cloud-based software later on. And the means that people wanted for being able to get that information across, as you well know, and everybody listening to this probably knows, the means of it became through a company's website. And when that website basically became the new front door on the sales department, the natural extension of that was, all right, how do we get people to the website? Organic, referral, paid search, paid social, etc.
Yeah.
There's the story.
Interesting. And you eventually started marketing What's New, I guess about 12 years ago, or 12 or 13 years ago?
I started blogging in 2009 to scratch my itch around telling people how I thought this way of marketing should be done. And then 2013 kind of made it a full-blown agency.
Nice. Okay, so it's 2013. So around the same time, I think we were 2012. And it's interesting because, you know, for SEO Plus, really our first company was called Spin Web Solutions, and it was web design. Like, that was my trade. And I saw the same thing. It was like, people have a website. People had a website. You know, it was becoming more of a commodity at that point, and, you know, people were not willing to pay as much. All these kinds of things. There was more competition. However, the opportunity was in driving traffic to it, because not as many companies were really going after that. I found at the time, anyways. Now it's a bit crazy.
Yeah, and it sounds like we followed the same chain of logic.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, your company, you focus a lot on I guess the paid ads component. I guess, you know, a lot to do with the marketing funnel. You know, what's your team look like now? What's kind of the makeup, and what type of clients are you working with?
Sure. So the two sides of our client service organization kind of break down into people who manage campaigns and people who do analysis. Analysis and, let's call it, infrastructure. By that I mean tagging, as well as being able to spin out dashboards and reports. So those are the two kind of pieces. And then, because each of the paid platforms is, you know, a world unto itself, we normally break it up by a person's specialty. So if you're, and keep in mind, we do all B2B. So even within the Google ecosystem, we have specialists on paid search, specialists on display GDN, we have specialists on YouTube, right? That's the kind of way that we slice it. And yeah, that pretty much is how we dice that up. And then the rest of the agency, which, I mean, we're rather small, but the sales and marketing function is headed by me. And then we've got some help on our admin, sales ops, and content writing and podcast production.
Nice. Okay, that's great. And So you're doing more of the sales and marketing piece, and then have kind of other people doing the actual nitty gritty paid ad stuff for the most
You
part.
got it.
Nice. Okay.
Yep.
What I'm curious more around, I guess, the paid ads component. Like, where are you seeing? What do you think the biggest opportunity is like this year for paid ads?
I think the main, all right, opportunity, but then we're going to have to jump after this to the challenge.
All right.
So the opportunity for me, the opportunity for me is automation, and I can mean, many things by that. Somebody will probably lob in AI when they refer to that, but by automation, I simply mean that at some point somewhere in between the buyer giving off signals that they could be right for a certain offering and, let's say, an ad platform putting that offering in front of them, there's got to be more than just the most manual of setup. If you think like Google AdWords circa 2005, it's got to be more than just, if they're searching for this one exact term, and I will pay $5, but only $5 for their click. There's just way too many other pieces. So for me, that is a great opportunity. There are many pieces that, when done right, can allow a nearly personal experience for the buyer. And it's funny, I get into these conversations with my kids where even just yesterday, one of my kids was saying, well, I'm told that if you want to buy this certain thing, if you go on a desktop, it's this price, but if you check for the very same thing within a few minutes on your phone, the price is 40% less. And he said, oh, so that means that, like, that's how the system works. I said, no, that means that somebody is not doing a good job. They may have set automation with a very, blunt instrument and just, pulled that crank and said, I want to retarget that person. And, I'm afraid of losing them, so drop by 40%, whatever I was showing as a price. I think we can do far better than that. And across every platform, the chance for automation is coming stronger because we're getting more and more able to use, and I mean like marketers, whether in-house or agency, are getting better at using data. And that data is going to provide the clues for how we can make fine adjustments to all those dials so that the experience is that much better for the buyer.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I think one of the examples you brought up around the price changing on mobile versus desktop, I saw that a few years ago on, I think it was Marketplace, and it was on the travel industry and specifically flights, right? It based on, if you're searching from your desktop, you might be more relaxed with your, wife or husband by your side, or, versus like on the go on your mobile, you're less likely to convert. So let's drop the price and maybe they'll, or it's the third time you come back. Well, let's make sure they sign up or purchase it,
Yes, and I'm going to now segue over to what the challenge is, but it's not that simple.
Of course.
If we could broaden it to a few more signals, like what other properties have you been on that the ad platforms are aware of? If we're talking search, do your keywords have in-market intent? Are you, or is it more, generic or brand? There's just a whole lot of other signals that we could be using. And if we're lazy, we'll just do the 40% price drop. But if we actually know what is needed, we should be able to state at least hypotheses about, okay, well, if you are this far along, then the right thing to do for you versus everybody else who, kind of looks like you, but if we get granular, we see that they're not you, we should be able to specify exactly what kind of experience you're going to have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to give the best results. So that can work. Okay, what's the challenge, Glenn? The challenge is that we're right in the middle of a big war over data, and some people are rightly or wrongly wrapping themselves up in privacy around it. I mean, yes, there's regulators who want data privacy, but I'm seeing some of the browser platforms and device platforms, naming names, Apple would be one.
Mm-hmm.
But these companies are, and you've got Google with the going away of cookies. This is now posing a major challenge to what I just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And those platforms aren't just doing it in a very clear way where you and I and every other marketer could just see ahead on the horizon and say, okay, well, there's going to be less data.
Yeah.
No, they're doing it a really dumb way, which is they're cherry picking the things that make their platform the most money. They're obfuscating small numbers, like we've seen with Google doing with the search terms, and insignificant numbers not being reported or for queries. This is not helping. And so I still very much want to see that future where we can get a really dialed in, highly specific user experience.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not kid ourselves. It's going to get harder to do that. And companies are bringing more of their data in-house, and they're not able to see stuff. So we can help companies get around that. The more we do with encouraging them for first-party audiences, email lists, right? Things that you have as your internal assets. You're not relying on Criteo or another tool way out there to
Mm-hmm.
find you things, but it's not easy.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two streams of thought. I think, around the privacy and data, and I think most people don't even realize what is happening. For example, with the Apple and the changes they're making and how that's going to impact advertisers. I think it's very significant, and it's going to affect a lot of the personalization, a lot of the tracking, retargeting, any of this stuff, right? And I think that's the challenge. Everyone's trying to automate more, get more granular, use those signals, to improve their results. Whereas it's going to become more difficult. And something that comes to mind for me was, in the early days of SEO and Google Analytics, used to be able to, there was actually a similar to in paid ads, but it was basically a search term report, organic search term. So you would actually see when somebody visited your website, what keyword they put into Google, right? And they did get rid of that for privacy reasons. And now you can go into Google Search Console and link it that way, but it's not the same that it was. But now they're doing a similar thing with paid ads. So it is concerning. It's becoming more challenging for marketers, exactly like you said.
And if I had one message to leave with today, it would be, let's rise to the challenge. It's still worth doing, right? Let's not just throw our hands up and say, it's too hard. No, it is getting harder, yeah. But if the things that you found that really jazzed you, like you mentioning, knowing the keywords that somebody was using to come to your website and the underlying search query, if you look harder, you can probably divine some of those things. You can look around corners at the data. You can try to get large enough data sets and slice it and run an experiment. So you can still get that, but we kind of have to think like maybe the people at StatsCan think, where they do census level stuff and they try very hard to get broad trends without, you try to report data, but you don't report data that divulges personal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that personal stuff, if I get kind of broader for a second and more like around society and in general, you don't want to move too far in that direction, because Big Brother's at the very end of that road. So I care about privacy as an individual.
Yeah.
And that's why I, as a marketer, say I have to up my game and I have to do things that will give a good experience without taking that big brother approach of saying, well, I must have all the data about you and I will own you. That's not fair because so just golden rule stuff, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say the hardest part of being a marketer is?
That to me involves marketing has gotten really fragmented to the point that, look at our two agencies. There's some overlap, but there's a lot that is not overlapped. And yet we both say that we do marketing. So to me, in this highly fragmented area, the challenge is bridging across those different specialties. So I encourage my people to try to imagine, if you've heard people talk about a T-shaped career before, right? So T-shape, you've got, your kind of bottom of the T is the things that you go really deep in, but you've got the top of the T, and the top of the T is things that sort of well, but they are adjacent to the one thing you're really deep in. And it's this top of the T where you can relate to your coworkers, you can relate to your clients, you can relate to even non-marketers who are, let's say, at C-level, and their executives that are leading their company. That decoding that you have to do, moving from the specific to the general, moving from the technical to more plain English, like things that you could explain to your mom or your grandma. That's hard in marketing because you have to maybe slice off a little corner of what you're trying to explain, because you do have to boil it down a little, but you're trying to just get the essence across because the other person needs to understand it. Maybe they have budget that they will be willing to give you, but you've got to argue for why that budget is needed. But you can't waste the whole day with explaining everything that you know. So that decoding, I think, is difficult, but I'm encouraged. If I look at other disciplines, there's university professors that do this all day. There are YouTube people that do this all day. Anybody who writes a book, at least in the intro of the book, they have to do this. Podcasting, other things. So, if somebody really wanted to know why I bother, with blogging or podcasting or some of these things, it's so I can continually practice that decoding, because we can all get in our own heads and we can all get into the stuff that we do on the job so deep that we can't even tell somebody else what it means. And I think at that point we better, throw it into reverse and go back, because that's not really helpful. I used to think it was helpful to go as deep as you could. And there are some careers where that's helpful, but if you lose that ability to just talk with other people across the top of that T, that comes at a high price.
Trying to keep it simple, avoiding jargon, all those things. I catch myself sometimes with that, especially in SEO. So it's really good points. I think good segue from that. You mentioned kind of your podcast. Obviously, thank you for having me as a guest. On your episode earlier, I guess in the fall. And I think you've done 40 episodes now. So tell us a little bit about that, funnel reboot, and how you got started and how it's progressed.
Sure. Funnel Reboot is very simply a place where I try to share what I get to learn, the things that our team experiences, and the things that don't let this go to your head, but that other smart people are learning, and spread it around. Being a content producer, there's a lot of eye-opening that happens when you do that. And one of which is that you're your own lab, test, and you start to see some analytics that shows you the cause and effect between, things that you're talking about and things that people care about.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of us who, like you and I've talked about this before, it's the word I like to use around it is a sandbox.
Mm.
So sandboxes are very helpful. People listening to this who are in an agency, you're lucky because you are, unless you're actually writing all the content for a client, you are able to take something that they have sweated over and simply see what kind of reach you can get on it. There's a whole lot more that you can learn, though, if you become the one who is the producer of some content, because then instead of you kind of like doing a report mark grade of what somebody else has done, you're closing that loop yourself and understanding, oh, I better talk less about this and more about that, because the numbers clearly show that that is more interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Just on that, I kind of fit a little bit more into the introvert camp than the extrovert, and so I like interviews because they allow me to kind of polish those skills.
Mm-hmm.
But about once every 5 or 6 episodes, I throw a solo cast in where I prattle on some topic that has me interested enough to go for 20, 25 minutes.
Yeah. Have you tried Clubhouse yet?
No. So the fact that something is only going to live, for that one time. I mean, let's even take this to stories. I have only done a little bit of dabbling in this kind of ephemeral, one time or 24-hour type content. And, maybe it's my age, but I heard somebody else who's about my age say, I work hard enough to make the content that I make. I'd like to think that it could live for a little bit longer than a day.
Yeah. Yeah,
I may be a consumer on Clubhouse. I can see that. I can see getting on and watching what some people, especially if I know them. Yeah. I think that would be okay. But what's your take?
So I got invited to the Clubhouse by Frank, who works with us, and so I hopped in a couple rooms last week.
Frank?
Yeah, the first one I hopped into was Hayden Cash, and he's been on the show as well, and he's pretty well known in Ottawa for just social media marketing, paid ads, that kind of stuff. So I hopped in a chat, and it was him and this lady Mallory Rowan, who's kind of does some influencer stuff, and it was a good chat. They had about 30 people in the room. Later on, and I didn't engage; I was kind of just watching. And then later on at night, I hopped into one with Jamie Lee, who's doing all of our TikTok stuff. They're all kind of in the same group, but they're all like really good, young, kind of lots of energy and into this, digital marketing stuff. So I hopped in a room there, and it was actually pretty cool. There was some pretty like heavy hitters that jumped into the room. There was like Tiags, who's like from Ottawa, this basically like producer who's like top 10 on Spotify right now for a lot of the songs, like through TikTok and stuff. And then there was another lady who had actually just started creating TikTok videos, and she basically got hired by Investigative Discovery to actually host their show after just doing like these TikTok videos. So it was really cool. But like one thing I was like, I want to be, if I'm going to do this, I'm more like, I like to be in control. So I want to be the one like bringing the guests and, in the conversation versus just like watching, right? That's kind of my style. So that was my takeaway.
Yeah. The ability for the internet, once again, to flatten things and get us out of, and I'm hearkening back to, a time where I remember you couldn't get a meeting with a manager, a director, a VP, or anybody like that, without making it through a gatekeeper first. It's great that we have this kind of openness. It's great that you can reach out to anybody, and as long as you've got something worthwhile to say, they're probably going to have something positive as a response. And I encourage anybody, I don't care what platform it is. I mean, I'm partial to, maybe the Fogey Network, LinkedIn, but, and I realize, Twitter is yesterday as well, but it doesn't matter really what the platform is. It matters more that you are putting something out there and finding other people who share your viewpoint and striking up the conversation, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting, so you mentioned kind of Fogey Network, LinkedIn, but like that is the business network. And what's really funny actually in that clubhouse, a lot of them were talking, and there was this talent agent came on, and he was basically giving them tips on like, hey, if you have like a big following on TikTok, like here's how to do a media kit, here's how you should approach organizations, here's how you can keep it corporate, all these things. And then he's like, and try LinkedIn, and they're like, whoa, how did you post on LinkedIn? Like, how do you format content? So don't take it for granted. Like we're trying to figure out these younger networks, but they're trying to figure out some of these more established. It was really interesting take. So.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was kind of funny. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's very funny. There are some things that are timeless. Last week the same kind of thing came up with a cover email, right? And somebody was asking, how do I do that? This is, if you were in COVID, of course, but there are books in libraries on how to write a cover letter. Mm-hmm. And so it is interesting to know, and this is, I guess, one thing also that probably we as marketers run afoul of, is we do like things when they're bright and shiny. And I think it's always good to keep an eye on those things. But remember that they are usually a reformulation of something that we've already got. Mm-hmm. And maybe they have a really nice twist on it, but don't throw out the old. Because there were things that have happened, and I'm going to tie this back. I'm really grateful for that set of courses that I took back in university on Greek and Roman history, because that taught me there's very little that's new. People have always been relatively smart. People have always been relatively inquisitive, and we've gotten better tools, but people are people, and marketing is about reaching people. So I really favor that balance of old and new, so that we don't necessarily leave the old or despise the old. There's a lot of good there, and I'd encourage people to try and be open to it, even if it doesn't say it was invented in 2018 or 2019 or 2020 or 2021.
Yeah, that is true. That is a good tip. Something Eddie, my business partner, always kind of brings up. The older sales techniques, or just relationship tools, or whatever it might be, right?
If things work, they have a funny way of hanging around.
Yeah, absolutely. If you could give your younger self any advice, what would it be?
I think when I was younger, I probably focused a lot on good, but what at least choosing digital taught me is that you're going to have to go into fields in the next couple of years that may not even exist today. So without contradicting what I've said earlier, I think what's important is to just look for a large enough, let's say, territory. Imagine that you're trying to discover a new place, and this is conceptual, right? So have you found a place where there's big enough concepts and far enough implementation that you wouldn't mind roaming around in that territory for years? And if you have found something like that, you're going to have to leave behind, well, I know how to do this one thing well. No. Don't worry so much about the single skill. Kind of think of the broader concepts. And if the concepts jazz you and get you out of bed in the morning, then you'll pick up other skills, of course, as you go. But those skills will be a means to an end of understanding how they all fit together. And I think that would have helped me, because I think we can always get stuck in this, especially if we're in a salary-based position. Mm-hmm. I know how to do this, therefore I'm worth this much. okay, yes, there is that, and you certainly see that in the world of job postings. But if you ask, a different question like, well, what do I understand, or what am I really thirsty to understand more of? Then when you're looking at what you need to know next, it kind of becomes very simple to you what you should read about, learn about, but it also becomes easier for someone, let's say, hiring you, or maybe somebody who wants to, get you together with them and a few others and form a team.
Mm-hmm.
They understand where you're going, and they understand how you will never get stale in an area, because you always will be on top of understanding this concept.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And, you kind of mentioned the salary thing versus your responsibilities and whatnot. It makes me think of, I've had a lot of jobs over the years, but one of my first kind of, I guess you can call it career moves or real jobs, was for like a IT company. And originally they brought me in as a, just answering the phones, booking appointments, basically, right? You had to be bilingual. My French wasn't the best, but I could get by on the phone, and it was $10 an hour. But what happened was at the time I was still doing a lot of freelance web design and stuff like that. And the owner came to me one day. He's like, "Oh, you do web design? Like, interesting. Some of our clients are sometimes ask about that. They might be looking for that." So ends up I end up basically selling like a couple contracts to their customers. And at the time I had no idea what I was doing, so he would send me through, here's how you do a proposal, here's how you do it, charge $100 an hour. So what ended up happening is basically they would give me $30 an hour for every hour that I billed of the 100, on top of my 10, because I was still doing that duty. And then I was doing sales, they gave me 10%. So it was like basically adding value to their company just based on the existing skills I already had, even, right? It was a win-win. Their customers got something, they made money, I made money, and I developed my skills. So it was it's a good way of just like add more value, and like the money will come, right? But you have to add that value.
Yeah, and I think someone, and it sounds like it was the manager or CEO there, saw in you that, what Brock really wants to do is understand how technically you can make someone a better business. So the manifestation of that, when you weren't answering the phones, was helping them with their website. But they're kind of all the same thing, because it is technical, and helping a company is helping a company. So whatever newfangled thing comes along to do that, if Brock is my guy who can kind of use those two things together, Brock has far more value to me than just booking the appointment. So that's a great story.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome, Glenn. Well, let's open it up to questions. I see a bunch of questions already in YouTube chat here. So I'll kind of read them off to you, and we'll go from there.
Please.
All right. So where is it here? Okay, from Rory. Okay, this one's more of a comment. So it's leveraging automation and data to provide unique experiences for a variety of audiences. Great point about broadening signals. What platforms are connected, our keywords in market, etc. Okay, so that was more of a comment. Rory, are you...
Thanks, Rory. That's great.
Are you or the team using any scripts in Google Ads? And if so, what are your top 2?
Sure. So I'm not that close to it, but my last memory of that, we've been using scripts in past for example, when we've had premise-related B2B, we had a script that modified bids based on how close the searcher was in radius, and we had to make sure that we were, when we adjusted bids, we had to make sure that we weren't hitting an overall ceiling on budget. So I remember we have been using scripts to modify bids and budgets so that we still have the same overall spend, but that we were, if a searcher was 100 kilometers away, 50 kilometers away, 10 kilometers away, that we were bidding different amounts. So that's one that I remember. And then the other one that I think is important, and it doesn't matter if it's a script that you use to do this, but the annoyance that platforms have is of using enhanced bidding when they're trying to get you a certain desired thing, and with the effect of any budget change that you do, it starts to play havoc with what they'll do for bids. So, I mean, to put that in plain sense, we have offline models that, for example, in a spreadsheet, we'll say, okay, so if we have changed budget, or we want to change budget on something, and we know that over a 30-day period, to come, that the budget is going to be different from what it was. We just want to make sure that the campaign platform doesn't go bananas. I saw it happen when we did the reverse, and I think it was a YouTube campaign. We had spending, let's say it was, I don't know, 50 a day, and we decided that we didn't need it anywhere near that. We dropped it to 10 a day. But on the day that we moved it down from 50 a day to 10 a day, it hadn't been spending very much. And then it spent like 29 days worth of spend on that last day.
Oh my gosh.
Because it was prorating what we had done. And I guess they saw that we weren't going to be giving them as much budget, so they just went to town.
Wow.
Don't tell me that that is the one day that you happen to have really quality visitors. I don't believe it. So scripts to me are a good way to maybe remove some of that twitchy trigger finger that I see platforms having, so that you end up spending the amount that the client gave you on budget, and please not over budget.
Nice. And what functionality do you look for in automation? So like adjusting keywords, modifying bids, anything else?
So if we veer over into social, for example, and we take a LinkedIn campaign or a something like that, maybe Twitter. For me, it's more about which ads are being shown, and the automation for me. I mean, we're stepping there slowly, but one piece of that automation is being able to offer enough variations. So let me give you a quick example in LinkedIn. If you are doing a proper job of a B2B campaign, to my way of thinking, you should be trying for maybe one audience of VPs, one audience of, let's say, director level, one audience of manager. And what you're trying to figure out is whether or not the ads that you have are getting across to that level with the right kind of impact. And if you have, let's say, a very day-to-day level ad, you have more of a, what are the key things that you need to watch for as you're maintaining these, this area that you're worried about. And then maybe there's this like broadest, what is the strategy around this supposed to be? So you've got like 3 different ads. In that scenario I've just given you, you've got 9 different combinations. And let's say even that you do a ad series that, your images are blue, and another one where your images are red. Okay, so now you're at 18. So being able to automate even the loading of those ads is the pinch point. And so I look for something as simple as that. And then, of course, on the automation side, I look for automation to try and highlight and make it very clear to the person working on this what's working and what's not. And that's kind of difficult because you've got to roll together each of those ads, and you've got to try and express it in a way that makes sense.
Great answer.
To a human.
Absolutely. Yoshi, what's your take on the Google Display Network, and do you believe it has more impact than going publisher direct?
I think GDN can be a gateway to going publisher direct. Many times I've seen companies using ad inventory when what they really wanted was to see how a particular trade publisher, how useful their site was. And so GDN provided them a small scale test to do that. And then they would go to the trade publisher or maybe they're looking at the rate cards that that publisher has and saying they're pricing too rich because I can stay with a small amount of inventory, or no, the amount that I had to spend and the return I got for my GDN ads on their site is justification that I will be willing to pay what their rate card says.
Nice. Lisa, do you run campaign experiments alongside ongoing campaigns with Google Ads? Why or why not?
So campaign experiments alongside of Google Ads. I'm not sure if I'm going to answer, it's Lisa, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I'm answering Lisa's actual question, but I have one rule of thumb that I hope can help here. And I'm going to go with a Ghostbusters reference in explaining what I mean by this. You absolutely have to make sure that, let's take a search campaign, that if you have 2 ads and you have 2 landing pages, you better get clear on which thing you're trying to test at the moment. Are you trying to divine what offer is better, or are you trying to figure out which call to action on the page is actually making the difference? So my Ghostbuster reference here is when those guys have their gun packs out and they're trying to stop the ghosts, but if they happen to cross the streams, then everything blows up and they don't achieve the mission. So my advice to you is don't cross the streams. Test either 2 ads to 1 landing page, or test 1 ad to 2 landing pages. And you can actually have your cake and eat it too, because if you listen to what I just said, you've probably figured out, well, if I have enough data, I could just do 1, like at the ad level, find out what the best offer is, and then kind of let the winner of that race be my default ad, and then go down to the landing page and test the 2 and see which of the 2 is winner there. So I'm not saying that you can't conduct these experiments and get what you want, but you have to plot it out. You have to have a plan ahead of time. And if, for anybody agency side, tell the client the method that you're using so that they will be patient and they will wait for the experiment to finish.
Communicate, over communicate.
Yeah.
Doesn't hurt. Rory, I saw your tweet about the Ponderings of a PPC Professional book by Kirk Williams. What PPC related book has provided you with the most value, whether technical knowledge or critical thinking?
Okay, so Kirk's is a good book. His is not a technical book, as you can see. I'm just showing it here. It's rather thin. So, but he does have some good takes on some of the large issues that we're currently dealing with. We've already talked about them: privacy, automation, and then he goes into a little bit about client expectations. PPC is tough because if you go with, so if you are already a practitioner and you're in a PPC platform, most days, there would be 0 books that I would tell you about because they're changing too frequently. The book will be out of date by the time it's printed. I will point you to some other friends and people that know Kirk, the folks at Clicks Marketing in the States. So this is Joe Martinez and Michelle Morgan. They do a series of YouTube spots on different PPC platforms, some very basic nuts and bolts, how to do stuff, and they'll show you features that even if you're looking at them regularly, maybe they'll point out some things that you haven't already noticed. So that would be probably my best advice to you. If you really want an answer for a book, there is one I'm going to kind of point out, and more for the fact that there's a person behind this book that is probably important for anybody who earns a living through PPC to know about. Perry Marshall, and the point of this whole book, you don't have to read it because the title basically says it. 80% of your value can come from 20% of what you do. So just make sure that 20% is the right 20%.
Great recommendations.
Wow, we're getting a library tour here.
I know, right? Rory added clicks. I've chatted with Tim Jensen a few times on the PPC chat hashtag on Twitter. So there you go.
And Rory, if you make it known that you're on PPC chat, I will be glad to shout out you. PPC chat, noon on Tuesdays, hashtag PPC chat.
There you go. Hardy, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you believe that the quality of product affects the success of a paid marketing campaign?
Well, it's no lower than a 7. This is a good thing about the internet. The internet has required us to have a consistent experience through and through. There's nowhere to hide. There's no putting on of impressive but fake credentials or reviews. Look at every company, Glassdoor. Look at Amazon reviews. Look, no matter where you go, you have to live it. You have to point out the flaws, try to address them, be transparent. So I find it a core trait that I look for in companies that I'm going to work with. And I try my very best to practice it myself. So I hope that's not too fuzzy, but that's my experience on how much it matters for a brand to be transparent.
Definitely. I like that tip. And I'd say too, you can do it perfectly and it may not mean you get a good review. Quick pop quiz. What product since COVID started has gotten a really high amount of negative reviews based on COVID? Any thoughts?
Negative reviews based on. There was that brief time in March where some people were confusing Corona beer, but
no, scented candles. Scented candles. So people who
really,
because you lose your sense and taste, I guess, if you have COVID, right? So people who didn't realize, they're all just like bombing with negative reviews, right? So.
Right, but it's not the candle; it's you.
Exactly. Why can't I smell it? Amanda, so last question. This is from Anna. Thoughts on DuckDuckGo and its prioritization of privacy? How should marketers and SEOs take this search engine into account?
Shout out to Anna first, and it's a very good question. Because we're almost entirely paid, don't touch the DuckDuckGo side of things. However, I want to say it's Gabriel Weinberg who's behind that. I think that's right. I applaud what folks like that are saying. This is actually a really good point to maybe finish on. Points that DuckDuckGo has on why there should be privacy. If folks remember on Netflix a few months ago, The Social Dilemma came out. You've got other people who are, in my field, another person that I would say is a contrarian. There's two of them I would point you to. Number one is Dr. Augustine Fu, who is a big kind of ad fraud guy. And then there's another guy named Bob Hoffman, who is known as the ad contrarian. And these are people who throw rotten eggs at the outside. It looks like they're throwing eggs at us, at what your folks do or what my folks do, but they're not. They're pointing out things that we really need to listen to and ways that we can get better. So the importance of a search engine like DuckDuckGo is it's able to deliver that experience without taking too much. They have found an equitable exchange of value between the places that want to be listed on the site and the people who want to search for them. So I think that balance will need to be kept there. I will tell you that if the pendulum, and it has swung pretty hard in either direction, but if it swings way too hard to the advertiser and the marketer side, our whole profession is in peril of being ruined or being regulated to death. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to see that. Mitch Joel once said, you know, every new marketing thing that comes out, if marketers are given half the chance, we'll ruin it. Like our seeds of destruction are kind of, oh, this is great, I want it, and I get to know everything about my user, and I can just like smother them. I can spam the hell out of them. We're kind of compulsive that way, and so we need to listen to the contrarians who can tell us, no, don't do that, or go this far and stop. Yeah. So I think that's very helpful, but because we're all liable to drink the Kool-Aid. I've drunk it many times, and I need to listen to people who are telling me, hey, you can't see it, but you are now like not objective. You need to pull back.
Awesome. Glenn, thank you so much. This was a really great chat, and thank you, as always, and hopefully we can chat again soon. Really appreciate it.
I'd love it. And if anybody wants to reach out to me or listen to the podcast, anything like that, I'm here and I'm at your disposal.
Absolutely. Funnel Reboot podcast, and at Hey Glens on Twitter.
Hey Glenn S on pretty much any channel will get you to me. So yeah, I'd encourage people to reach out. Don't be a stranger.
Awesome. Really appreciate it, Glenn.
Sure.
Take care.
Good talking, Brock.